I want you to imagine a machine. Not a car, not a computer. A biological machine. One that was engineered with a single, non-negotiable operating requirement. It must move. This machine was designed over millions of years to cross continents, to cover dozens of miles in a single day, to navigate every terrain on this planet with nothing but the structural genius of its own architecture. It produces its own energy. It repairs its own microscopic circuitry while in motion. It upgrades its own operating system in real time, based on the demands placed on it. But here is the critical detail buried in the owner's manual that almost nobody reads. This machine does not maintain itself at rest. It maintains itself through movement. The repair protocols, the hormonal recalibration, the cellular renewal, none of it runs at full capacity when the machine is stationary. The maintenance is motion dependent. Now picture what happens when you take that machine, this extraordinary, self-repairing biological system, and park it for 12, 14, sometimes 16 hours a day, in a chair, in a car, on a couch, day after day, year after year. The machine does not simply sit there neutrally, patiently waiting to be used again. Things begin to happen. The fluid systems start to stagnate. The structural components begin to stiffen from disuse rather than wear from use. The hormonal systems that depend on movement signals to calibrate themselves start running miscommunication patterns. The cellular machinery that was supposed to be cleaning house starts accumulating debris. The clock, in a very literal biological sense, starts running faster in the wrong direction. That machine is you. And the garage, the sedentary structure that modern American life has engineered as the default setting for most adults, is slowly, invisibly, doing something to your biology that no supplement, no medication, and no weekend run can fully compensate for. Stay with me through this entire video, because what I am about to explain is not a list of vague benefits you have heard before. It is a systems-level biological picture of what actually happens to your body, minute by minute, adaptation by adaptation, when you make one specific, ancient, completely free change to your daily routine. And there is a specific moment in that walk, a biological threshold that most people never reach because they stop too soon, where something shifts in your brain that most people spend hundreds of dollars on supplements trying to replicate. We are going to get there. But first, you need to understand what sitting is actually doing to your biology right now. There is a concept in exercise physiology called the sedentary cascade. Researchers began documenting this in detail starting in the 1980s, and the more precisely they measured it, the more alarming the timeline became. Here is what the cascade actually looks like, starting from the moment you sit down. Within minutes of assuming a seated position, the electrical activity in the large muscle groups of your legs, the most metabolically significant muscle mass in your entire body, drops dramatically. The muscles are not simply resting, they are functionally switching off in a way that has immediate biochemical consequences. Because those muscles are no longer contracting, the production of an enzyme called lipoprotein lipase, which is essentially your body's mechanism for clearing fat from your bloodstream and delivering it to tissues that can burn it as fuel, falls by approximately 90%. 90%. Not a gradual decline, a near complete shutdown. The metabolic housekeeping system that keeps your blood clean, that processes the triglycerides circulating in your circulation, that manages the lipid environment your cardiovascular system depends on. It essentially stops operating when you sit. The longer you sit, the more your bloodstream accumulates the metabolic byproducts that lipoprotein lipase was supposed to be clearing. Your blood thickens, metabolically speaking. Your cardiovascular system operates in a progressively more hostile environment. And this cascade does not wait for hours. It begins in minutes. Now here is the good news, and this is the part I want you to really absorb, because it changes how you think about the value of even a short walk. The repair protocol for the sedentary cascade is not complicated. It does not require a gym membership, specific athletic clothing, or a certain level of physical fitness. It requires movement. The moment you stand up and begin walking, the electrical activity returns to your leg muscles. Lipoprotein lipase begins reactivating. The metabolic switch that's sitting turned off starts turning back on. The first step is not symbolic. It is biochemically significant. And what unfolds over the next 30 to 45 minutes of continuous, moderate intensity walking is a sequence of physiological changes that researchers are still, in 2024, discovering new dimensions of. Let's go through them in the order they actually occur. The first change begins in the blood. Within the first 5 to 10 minutes of walking, as your muscles begin rhythmically contracting with each step, something specific happens to your blood glucose management that most Americans desperately need. Your leg muscles activate a glucose transport mechanism involving a protein called GLUT4. Here is why this is significant. Under normal circumstances, the hormone insulin acts as the master key that opens the doors in your cell membranes to allow blood glucose to enter cells and be used as fuel. When cells become resistant to insulin, a state that now affects approximately 1 in 3 American adults to a clinically meaningful degree, those doors stay partially locked. Blood glucose stays elevated. The pancreas produces more and more insulin, trying to force the doors open. The entire metabolic system starts operating under strain. Muscle contraction provides an entirely separate pathway that bypasses the insulin resistance problem. When your muscles contract rhythmically during walking, they activate GLUT4 transport through a mechanical signal that does not require insulin as an intermediary. The doors open from a different key. Blood glucose enters the muscle cells directly, where it is burned as fuel for the movement you are performing. The glucose traffic jam in your bloodstream begins to clear without the need for an insulin surge. Research examining the blood glucose response to post-meal walking has found that a 15-minute walk after eating can reduce the postprandial blood glucose spike more significantly than some commonly prescribed interventions. Not after an hour of walking, 15 minutes. The mechanism is direct, immediate, and available to you every time you eat. The second change involves your stress chemistry. And this one is more important than most people realize, because it connects the simple act of walking to your testosterone, your mood, your cognitive clarity, and your evening sleep quality through a chain of hormonal effects that compound over weeks and months of consistent practice. Most Americans are living in a state of chronic, low-grade cortisol elevation. Not the dramatic, acute cortisol surge of a genuine emergency, the kind that saves your life in a crisis and resolves naturally afterward. The other kind, the persistent, background cortisol hum of a life filled with notification interruptions, financial pressure, professional demands, and the kind of low-level anxiety that modern American culture has normalized to the point where most people just accept it as their personality. This chronic cortisol elevation is not benign. It drives visceral fat accumulation, suppresses immune function, degrades sleep quality, and, crucially, is directly antagonistic to testosterone. Cortisol and testosterone share a biological seesaw relationship. When one is chronically elevated, the other is chronically suppressed. This is one of the primary hormonal mechanisms underlying the mood and energy deterioration that most American men over 40 describe without connecting it to a specific cause. Walking breaks this loop through a mechanism that is both physiological and neurological. Physiologically, Moderate intensity walking burns through the cortisol and adrenaline that chronic stress has been loading into your circulation. Your body produced those hormones to prepare you for physical action, to run from a threat, to fight a predator. Walking gives your system the physical discharge that those hormones were designed to precede. The biological logic completes itself. Cortisol drops. Adrenaline normalizes. The endocrine environment stops resembling an alarm that never stops ringing and begins resembling a system that got activated appropriately and then returned to baseline. Neurologically, there is something even more elegant happening. Walking forward through an environment, particularly an outdoor environment, produces a specific pattern of visual input called optic flow. As you move, objects in your peripheral visual field pass by continuously, creating a streaming visual signal that reaches your amygdala, the brain's threat detection and fear processing center. Optic flow signals to the amygdala that you are moving, that you are navigating, that you are not frozen in place facing a threat. This is a direct physiological calming input to the part of your brain that generates anxiety. The amygdala receives the forward movement signal and reduces its alarm output. The anxiety circuits quiet. This is not metaphorical. It is a specific neurological pathway, and it is why pacing is a universal human instinct when we are stressed. We are instinctively trying to generate the optic flow signal that tells our nervous system we are in motion, not cornered. Sitting still in front of a screen does the opposite. It creates the visual pattern of fixed attention on a point, which neurologically resembles the focused gaze of an organism facing a potential threat, keeping your amygdala in a low-level state of alert, regardless of how unthreatening your actual circumstances are. The third change begins around the 20 to 30-minute mark, and it is the one that most people never reach because they stop too soon, or because they never started. This is the threshold where walking stops being merely beneficial for your body and begins doing something remarkable to your brain. Something that researchers spent decades insisting was impossible, and that a Nobel Prize in the 2000s confirmed was not only possible, but replicable and consistent. The production of a protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which researchers abbreviate as BDNF. You need to know what BDNF actually is, because the popular shorthand, Miracle-Gro for your brain, undersells the specificity of what it does. BDNF is a neurotrophic growth factor that binds to specific receptors on neurons and initiates signaling cascades that support neuronal survival, axonal growth, synaptic plasticity, and, most significantly, adult hippocampal neurogenesis, the generation of new neurons in the hippocampus of the adult human brain. For decades, the consensus in neuroscience was that adult neurogenesis did not occur in any meaningful sense. The neurons you were born with were the neurons you would die with, and the trajectory was one of gradual, inevitable loss. That consensus turned out to be wrong. The hippocampus generates new neurons throughout adult life, and one of the most powerful triggers for that neurogenesis is exercise-induced BDNF production. The hippocampus is the brain structure most directly involved in memory formation, spatial navigation, and emotional regulation. It is also, and this is the detail that should matter most to anyone watching this video, the brain structure most vulnerable to age-related decline. Hippocampal volume decreases with advancing age in sedentary individuals, and that volume loss correlates directly with the memory difficulties, the processing slowdowns, and the emotional regulation challenges that most Americans associate with simply getting older. A one-year moderate-intensity walking program in healthy older adults produced measurable increases in hippocampal volume, closely associated with elevated BDNF levels. Walking did not slow the loss of hippocampal volume. It reversed it. The hippocampus grew. In adults who were already experiencing age-related decline, Consistent walking reconstituted the brain structure most responsible to memory and learning. This is not a marginal finding. It is a direct demonstration that the biological mechanism you need to protect your cognitive function as you age is not expensive, not pharmacological, and not time-consuming. It is available on any sidewalk, any park path, any neighborhood street in America, at any time of day, at any level of athletic fitness, for free. There is an additional cognitive mechanism that walking activates that is worth understanding specifically, because it explains a phenomenon that many high-performing Americans notice without understanding. When you walk at a comfortable, conversational pace, not so intense that your attention is consumed by the physical effort, your brain enters a state that neuroscientists call transient hyperfrontality. The prefrontal cortex, which is the region responsible for analytical thinking, self-criticism, worry, and the kind of focused, deliberate reasoning that cognitive work demands, reduces its activity level. Other brain regions that are typically suppressed during focused analytical work, the default mode network, the associative regions that connect disparate concepts, the pattern recognition systems that operate below conscious awareness, become more active. The mental landscape opens up. Connections form that the focused analytical state would have prevented. This is the neurological mechanism behind the observation that your best ideas often come during a walk, in the shower, or on a drive. Any context where focused analytical effort relaxes and associative thinking has space to operate. Steve Jobs famously conducted walking meetings. Charles Darwin built a dedicated thinking path on the grounds of his home, which he called the Sandwalk, and used it daily to work through the problems that eventually produced the theory of natural selection. They were not simply enjoying fresh air. They were engineering a neurological state that the desk could not replicate. The research on walking duration and health outcomes shows a dose-response relationship with a meaningful threshold at around 30 minutes of continuous, moderate-intensity walking per day. Below that threshold, the benefits are real but smaller, particularly for the BDNF production and hippocampal neurogenesis effects that require sustained, moderate intensity over a meaningful duration. Above that threshold, benefits continue to compound, but the marginal return per additional minute is lower than the return from the foundational 30. For most people, 30 minutes of daily walking is the practical target that delivers the majority of the documented health benefits without requiring a significant restructuring of their schedule. That 30 minutes does not need to be continuous in a single session for all of its benefits. Research on walking distributed across the day, 3 10-minute sessions versus 1 30-minute session, has found comparable metabolic and cardiovascular benefits for the fragmented approach, though the cognitive and BDNF benefits appear more robust from the single continuous session that reaches the threshold for sustained activation. A practical synthesis. 1 deliberate 20 to 30-minute walk per day as the primary habit, supplemented by conscious addition of walking to existing daily activities, parking farther from the entrance, taking stairs, walking while on phone calls, taking a short walk after each meal. The post-meal walk deserves special emphasis given the blood glucose mechanism we covered. Research specifically examining the timing of walking relative to meals found that walking within 30 minutes after eating, even for as little as 10 to 15 minutes, produces significantly greater blood glucose reduction than a walk of the same duration performed before eating or more than an hour after a meal. If you have pre-diabetes, insulin resistance, or simply the kind of post-lunch energy crash that most American office workers accept as normal, a short walk after eating is a direct mechanical intervention into the hormonal mechanism causing that crash. The GLUT4 activation during the post-meal walk clears the blood glucose spike before insulin has to do the heavy lifting, preventing the overshoot that causes the energy dip that follows. The time of day for your primary walk matters less than the consistency of the habit. But morning walks carry two specific advantages worth considering. First, morning sunlight exposure during the walk activates photoreceptors in the retina that synchronize your circadian clock, improving the hormonal rhythm, particularly the cortisol awakening response and the evening melatonin production that determines sleep quality and the overnight hormonal restoration that everything else depends on. Second, morning walks establish the habit before the decision fatigue and schedule compression of the day have the opportunity to crowd it out. The people who walk most consistently tend to walk in the morning, not because morning is biologically superior, but because the morning slot is the one most reliably protected from competing demands. Here is the final dimension of what daily walking changes, and it is the one that amplifies everything else on this list by changing not just what you do, but who you understand yourself to be. When walking becomes a daily non-negotiable, not an optional activity you add to your day when circumstances allow, but a baseline feature of your identity as a person who moves, the relationship between you and your physical health shifts in a way that has compounding effects on every other health behavior you maintain. The person who identifies as someone who walks every day is not the same person who is deciding each morning whether today is a walking day. The decision has already been made. The identity is the decision. And from that identity, choices about food quality, sleep consistency, stress management, and everything else we have discussed throughout this video start to align more naturally with the biological framework that supports them. This is the pattern that the blue zone populations demonstrate without ever articulating it. Movement was not something they decided to do for health reasons. It was simply part of how their days were built and how they understood their lives. The health was not the goal. The health was the outcome of a life structured around the biological requirements that evolution built into the machine.